$1980 TR8 fuel injected. Got a couple of issues. Alternators bad. Interior, the seats, I'd like to get them recovered. They're plain. They're not very good looking, so I'd like to do those. And we got a couple of oil leaks that I'd like to take care of. And the headlights. The headlights are flush mounted, they're pop-ups, but this right one here doesn't stop popping up and down unless you time it just right with the switch. So it needs the motor, probably the connections in the motor worked on. Okay, the 1980 TR8, the first thing we're going to work on is getting the alternator out that's bad. Of course, it involves removing this air cleaner and the hoses and then loosening it from the bottom and then bolting it from the top. To save time, I'm not going to show the actual removal of the alternator because it's a simple process and the exact opposite of installing it, which this video is about. Okay, so here's the alternator and we'll just bench test it to make sure that it's bad. This one's probably less than a year old and I probably haven't even put 50 miles on it, but it quit working. On the last drive, I just drove it a few blocks and it quit working. So we're going to check it out and maybe it's one we can just rebuild and have for a backup. I should mention this is an aftermarket alternator from a British parts seller. So a quick check of the alternator by hitting the stator with 12 volts to see if I can get a magnetic resistance and it turns freely. Most likely it's the diode bridge. Apparently it's not the best quality and obviously not very dependable, which is pretty hard to be less dependable than anything Lucas. As the joke goes, the reason the British drink warm beer is because their refrigerators use Lucas wiring. So just for fun, I tested the new alternator and there was resistance when I turned the pulley. I ended up going with a Mahle MG110 65 amp alternator, which had the same bolt pattern as the Lucas and a very similar plug. The pulley is slightly smaller, but it should be okay. It was recommended to me by a local automotive electric rebuilder. The funny thing is, I've owned British sports cars since I began driving at 16, and you'd think that I'd learned by now. They are definitely not known for their reliability. So a quick check to see that this Mahle alternator fits in, the bolt holes match up, and checking the pulley seems to line up with the crankshaft pulley. Now we tighten the top two 13mm bolts, and then we'll go underneath to set the tension of the belt. So what we're going to do is we're going to tighten from underneath because that's the easiest way. As you can see, the bolt is underneath along with the adjustable bracket. 13mm is tight, and now we'll lower it down and finish up. The alternator is in and tightened up, and the plug is secure. I went to go hook up the battery and there was a small arc that told me the wiring might not be correct. I started the car for a moment and the ignition light was on, so it's back to the alternator to correct the wiring, as obviously the plug is not correctly configured. So here's the correct configuration. The thick red cable should be brown according to the TR8 schematic, but it goes from the B terminal plus on the alternator to the battery for charging. The yellow wire goes from the plus terminal on the alternator to the brown wire that is sent to the voltage regulator so it can sense voltage to know how much power is needed to charge the battery. The green jumper goes from the IND terminal / indicator terminal on the alternator to the brown and yellow wire, also known as the exciter wire, that goes to the voltage gauge and the ignition light on the dashboard. Okay, it's time to start it up. See what we got. Everything's looking good. Voltage shows charging. Let's take a look and see what the voltage is. Got my voltmeter, 14.62, that's pretty good. We're looking good so far. Let's go up to the front. And it appears we're not frying any wires, so I think we're good to go and we can put this back together. I will videotape us putting this back together, because there's quite a bit of pieces like the air filter box and some hoses that had to come out in order for me to access the alternator. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put the filter in the box and put in the screws, because you can't access every screw once it's mounted inside the engine compartment. So first thing we'll do is get this all lined up and we will set the screws in. So when I removed the air filter box, I noticed the original cold air intake hoses were torn and the rubber flex hose from the air filter box to the mass air flow sensor was cracked and brittle. I remember hearing that a Subaru air intake hose for a 1999 through 2003 Legacy would work. I also heard that a company by the name of Aircraft Spruce and Specialty offer a very similar hose to the original cold air intake hoses that came with the TR8. You just have to cut the hose to length, so with a 5-foot length I was able to cut 2 hoses. The name of the hose is TR8 Ducting 2-inch. With the cover attached to the air filter box, it sits very snug in place. After about a half hour trying to wrestle the rubber intake hose onto the air filter box and mass air flow sensor, even with lubricant, I came to the conclusion that I had to come up with a different plan. The hose is very stiff, and needing to make an almost 90-degree turn made it just about impossible with the air filter box mounted. With the air filter box out and with no cover, the hose can be attached and the box slid into place with ease. The only issue is I can't install that screw under the core support. Securing the air filter box is the next step, and this bracket takes 4 10mm bolts. To tighten, you do have to reach into the inside of the wheel well to hold the nuts. Once tight, we drop in the air filter and hook up the cold air hoses to the cover. Installing the cold air hoses is pretty simple, but I do recommend you feed the hoses through the holes in the core support before clamping them down to the air filter box. Otherwise, you have to do it from underneath and it's a little more difficult. Once the hoses are secure, it's on to screwing down the air filter box cover. The next thing to do is to start it up and see if all is okay. So the ignition light is not on and the voltmeter is climbing. Everything looks good here. Sounds good. Thanks for joining. See you next time.